She sent a breakup text to the wrong number. The Mafia Don replied, "Come over, I'll make you forget. Come over, I'll make you forget." Maren Sundal had spent 2 years being told she ruined everything. So, the night she finally typed the words to leave Leland Price, her thumb slipped one digit and sent them to a stranger the whole city was afraid of. She did not know that last part yet. All she knew, standing in the cold stairwell of her building at 11 at night, was that she had finally written the message she had deleted 100 times over the winter. It was 4 sentences. It said that she was done. It said she was taking the small green suitcase and the coffee tin she kept hidden behind the flower, the one with the name of the clinic she used to run written on the lid in faded marker, and that he should not call. Her hands had shaken the whole time she wrote it, the way they always shook when she thought he might be watching, and she had pressed send before the shaking could talk her out of it. The delivered line appeared under her words. Then she saw the number above them, and the floor seemed to tilt. It was not Leland's number. She had typed a 7 where a 1 should have been, and the message meant to end her old life had gone to someone she had never met. She started to type an apology. "Wrong number," she wrote. "Please delete that. It wasn't meant for you." 3 dots pulsed. She waited, embarrassed, ready for confusion or a laughing insult, ready for one of the tired replies men sent, women who texted them by accident at night. Instead, the answer arrived in 4 calm words that did not sound like a stranger at all. "Come over, I'll make you forget." Maren felt the hair rise on her arms. There was nothing frantic in it, nothing drunk, and nothing that leered. It read the way a door reads when it is already open behind you, when you realize the cold on your neck has been there for a while. "I don't know you," she typed. "This is a mistake. I'm blocking this number." "That is the second thing you got wrong tonight," he answered. "The first was staying 2 years. Her thumb stopped over the screen. She had not told him anything except that she was leaving. She had not written 2 years anywhere. He should have been able to find it. She read her own message again and found the sentence, half buried in the middle, that a careless eye would slide past and a careful one would stop on. 2 winters of it, she had written. And no more. She was talking to someone who read every word as though it might be evidence. "Who is this?" she wrote. No reply came. She stood in the stairwell until her feet went numb and the motion light clicked off above her, then went up to the apartment that was not hers anymore in any way that mattered and did not sleep. Twice she reached to block the number. Twice she set the phone down instead, and hated herself a little for wanting to know. The next message came at 6 in the morning, from a different sender with no name, only a gray circle where a face should be. "You used to work with children who stopped speaking," it said. "There was a clinic. There were letters after your name before someone convinced you to give them back. My daughter has not said a word in 11 months. I have paid 4 specialists to fail. Name your price." Maren sat on the edge of the bed she had not slept in and stared at the words until they stopped looking like words. Everything in her that Leland had spent 2 years teaching to stay small told her to block the number and run. But under that, in the one room of herself he had never fully reached, something older than fear sat up and listened and would not lie back down. She told herself she was only driving out to say no, in person, which was a lie, and she knew it was a lie the moment she packed her old ribbon and pencils into the bag out of habit, and she went anyway. The Neary estate sat above the lake behind a wall, the length of a city block. A man named Basiliel met her at the gate, checked her name against nothing she could see, and did not smile. Inside, the house was all pale stone and long, cool silences, the kind of silence that cost money to keep. Maren had grown up in rooms that got louder when the important person walked in. This one did the opposite. Somewhere ahead of her a door closed, soft as a held breath, and the whole house seemed to lower its voice. Corrado Neri was standing at a window when she was brought in, and he did not turn around at once. She had time to notice the room, the maps on the far wall, the single chair angled so its occupant would always see the door. When he finally turned, she understood the quiet. He was not large the way she had built him in her head on the drive, not loud, not decorated with the noise powerful men usually wore like cologne. He was simply still, the way deep water is still, and it made every other person in the room seem to be moving too much, herself included. "You came to refuse me," he said. It was not a question. "I came to tell you no, where you could hear it," Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than her hands, which had already found the strap of her bag and begun to worry the worn edge of it. A woman rose from the sofa before Corrado could answer. She was beautiful in the expensive, unbothered way that made Marin suddenly aware of the split seam in her own coat. And she looked Marin over once, from her hair to her shoes and back, and smiled without warmth. "So this is the wrong number," she said. Ilaria Vosh in a voice like cool glass set down on stone. "The whole city is waiting to see whom Corrado marries, and he spends his morning importing a woman who talks to children who will not talk back. How charming!" She let the pause open like a trap. "She seems nervous. Tell me, does she always drop things, or only in front of people who matter?" Marin realized her bag had slid off her shoulder and spilled a pen and a spool of ribbon across the marble. Heat climbed her neck in a flood. She heard Leland in the shape of Valeria's laugh, the old patient voice that used to say, "You make everything an emergency. You cannot be taken anywhere. Nice." Her hands went cold and stupid, and she knelt to gather the pen and the ribbon, while the beautiful woman watched her do it. And Basile studied the ceiling, and then, from the floor, she saw the child. Vita Neri was small, for 6, folded into the far corner of the room with a box of pencils and a pad of paper, drawing as though not one of the adults existed. Everyone in the house had plainly learned to move around her the way you move around furniture, a problem that had stopped answering and become part of the room. But Marin, still on her knees on the cold marble, with the ribbon in her fist, went quiet, in a way that had nothing to do with shame, and watched the child's eyes instead of her hands. "She isn't ignoring you," Marin said, mostly to herself. Corrado's attention moved to her and sharpened to a point. "What did you say?" "She's following every word in this room," Marin said. "She looked up, before you spoke, because she felt you decide to. She knows exactly who is talking, and when and what it cost them. She isn't absent, and she isn't defiant. She's choosing. That is not the same thing as broken, and no one who told you it was the same thing has been watching her." For a long moment no one spoke. Ilaria's smile went flat and careful, and the still man by the window looked at Marin as though she had said something in a language he had given up on ever hearing again in his own house. "Stay," Corrado said. "Just until this afternoon." Then he added, quieter, in a tone she would only later understand he almost never used, "Please." The specialist file called Vita Defiant. It used the word regression 4 times in 2 pages. It recommended firmer structure, a fixed schedule, consequences for silence and a reward chart to make speaking worth her while. As though the girl were a clerk withholding change, she was perfectly able to hand over. They read it to Marin in the sitting room, Basile flat and dutiful, Ilaria lingering in the doorway as if to chaperone the inevitable failure. Corrado said nothing while it was read. He had placed himself where he could see both Marin and the child at once, and Marin noticed that he never let the girl leave the edge of his sight, even when he pretended to. "She isn't withholding anything," Marin said when the reading stopped. "You have all decided she is being difficult, because a difficult child is easier to manage than a grieving one. Difficult, you can correct. Grief you have to sit with, and no one in this house looks like they were taught how to sit with anything." "And what is the truth, then," Ilaria said, "that you can see from one morning on the floor, what 4 qualified people could not?" Marin did not answer her. She turned instead to Corrado, because he was the only adult in the room the child cared about. And the child, still drawing, had gone very slightly stiller, which meant she was listening. "When did she stop?" Marin asked him. "Not the month, the day. What was the last thing that happened before she went quiet?" Something moved across his face that the stillness usually kept hidden, and for a breath, the feared man was gone and only a father stood in his place. Her mother, he said. There was an accident. Vida was the one who found her, and she has not spoken a word since that afternoon. The room held its breath. Marin felt the whole shape of it settle into her chest at once, terrible, and at last, simple. Then hear me carefully, Marin said, low, so the child would have to reach for it rather than flinch from it. She is not refusing to speak. She spoke as loudly as a person can on the worst day of her life, and it saved no one. So she learned the lesson every frightened creature learns. She learned that her voice does not keep people alive. You cannot argue a child out of that with a chart. And you have spent 11 months trying to make her forget it by force, which is the one thing that will never work. Then what works, Corrado said. And it was not a challenge now. It was closer to a plea wearing the clothes of a challenge. You do not make her forget, Marin said. You make it safe to remember, out loud in her own time. One small piece at a time, with someone in the room who does not leave when it gets hard and does not cheer when it gets easy. That is all I do. It is slow and it is unglamorous and it cannot be scheduled. And it is the only thing that has ever worked. That is not what I hired you for, he said. I hired you to make her speak. No, Marin said. You will not get that from me, and you would not want the version of her you would get if you did. I do not drag anyone toward the place that hurts them most. Not a child, not anyone. If Vida speaks, it will be because she decided the room was safe enough to try, not because we cornered her into it to spare you the waiting. You presume to set terms here, Ilaria began, and got no further, because Corrado had lifted one hand, not sharply, barely at all, and the room went silent the way the whole house went silent when he entered it. Say the terms, he told Marin. No one else in the room while I work, Marin said. No reward charts. No one standing over her to price her own voice. I sit outside her door, and I wait until she looks at me, and I do not cross the threshold until she does. She decides when I come in. Every day, she decides. If you cannot allow a child that much, I will drive home tonight, and you can hire a fifth specialist to fail more expensively than the last four. She fully expected him to refuse. Men like him did not stand in their own houses, and let a woman in a frayed coat tell them which doors they could not open. She watched the refusal gather in his shoulders, old and automatic. And then, to her genuine astonishment, she watched him set it down. The way a man sets down something heavier than he wants anyone to know. Basile, he said, without looking away from her. Clear the East Hall, and see that no one disturbs it. He turned back to Marin, and something in his voice had gone lower, more careful, almost unguarded. And you, do not make me regret being told no twice in one day, in my own house, by the wrong number. Marin stood, and her hands, for the first time since she had crossed his gate, were perfectly steady. Marin did not knock. The East Hall had been cleared exactly as she asked. The guards moved off the doors, along it shut. Vida's door stood half open at the end of the corridor, and inside, the child sat at a low table with her box of pencils, her back a small, stubborn wall. A specialist would have crossed the room by now, would have crouched and coaxed and dangled a sticker for a syllable. Marin sat down on the floor of the corridor instead, her back against the cold plaster, opened her own pad on her knees, and began to draw. She drew a house, a plain one. One window, one door. She left the door open. She did not look up, did not speak, and did not as much as turn her head toward the girl. When the house was finished, she set the page down on the floorboards, just short of the threshold, close enough to reach and far enough that no one would have to come near her to take it. And she started a second drawing as though the first had never mattered at all. Time went by, the way it goes when you have decided not to count it. Somewhere in the house, a clock spoke twice, and she let it. Her hand moved, the light on the wall slid a slow inch. She was aware the whole while of a father standing far back at the mouth of the corridor, so still he might have been another door, A man who could empty a room by entering it, and who could not make himself leave this one. She did not look at him. This was not for him. The old voice tried her, the way it always tried her in the quiet. You will fail at this too, it said, in Leland's patient tone. You give things up. You gave up the clinic. You will give this child up the moment it gets hard, and everyone will nod, because they always knew. Marin breathed through it, and drew a crooked bird on a wire, and did not give anything up. The page at the threshold disappeared. She did not react. A long while later, a page slid back out across the floorboards toward her, pushed by a small hand that snatched itself back the instant its work was done. Marin picked it up. On the open door of her house, the child had drawn a second figure standing just inside it. Tall, faceless, waiting, not coming closer, just there. Marin's throat tightened, but her hands stayed level. She drew an answer. Below the faceless figure, she drew a smaller one, seated on the floor of the house, and she put a pencil in its hand, and she gave it no mouth at all, because she did not want to ask for a mouth yet. She slid it back across the boards. The conversation went on, without a single spoken word between them. A house, a room, a window with rain slanting through it, a cup with steam. A window, and behind its glass a small round sun she had pressed down in hard yellow, as if daring it to be there. Each page came back with something added, some small offered piece of a shut-up world, and Marin answered everyone, never pushing, never asking for more than the child had given. And then she drew the simplest question she owned. A house with a large figure and a small figure, and a careful road between them, and passed it under the door. The answer took a long time to come. When it came, it stopped her heart. The child had drawn a large figure lying flat on the ground. Beside it stood a small figure with its mouth open, a round black hole of a mouth, calling. Around them she had drawn nothing at all, no other figures, no one on the road. And through that small open mouth she had dragged her pencil back and forth, pressing so hard the paper had torn, until the calling was scribbled out and buried and gone. Marin looked at the worst afternoon of a little girl's life, set down in pencil, and she did not flinch from it, and she did not reach in to correct it. She drew slowly beside it. She drew the small figure again, mouth still open, still calling, and this time, next to it, she drew a second small figure, sitting down in the dirt, close, not hauling the first one up, not hushing it, just staying. Then she set her pencil down on the floor, where the child could see her let it go, and she waited. Vita looked up. For the first time, the child looked straight at her, eyes wet and enormous, and held the look and did not send her away. Only then did Marin rise and cross the threshold. She had at last been invited across, and lower herself to the floor an arm's length off, near enough to be a person, far enough to be a choice the girl could take back. At the end of the hall, the still man had come forward, without knowing he had moved. He was watching his daughter speak in the only language grief had left her, and something in his face, some long-set stone, had cracked cleanly down the middle and would not go back together. At the far end of the corridor, Basil had stopped moving entirely. A man who had seen a great many things in that house, and had plainly never seen this one, and he did not say a word, because there were no words in him equal to it. The visit was meant to last an hour. The light had gone gold and low across the floorboards by the time Marin finally gathered her pad to stand. And as she rose, a small hand shot out and closed on the hem of her coat, gripping the worn cloth, white-knuckled, refusing, and would not let go. Then the child looked up, once from Marin's face to her father's, and back again, weighing the two of them in some private scale, and tightened her grip. "Stay," the small fist said, more plainly than any word. Corrado watched his daughter choose a stranger to hold on to, and when he spoke at last, his voice had lost every hard edge it had ever owned. "Whatever she is paying you," he said quietly, "it is not enough. Name the rest." After that afternoon, the child began to wait for her. Donata, the housekeeper, reported it first with the guarded face of a woman who has decided not to say the word hope out loud in case it breaks. Each morning at a little before 9, she said, the girl dragged a kitchen chair to the tall window in the front hall, climbed onto it, and watched the gate for Marin's rattling gray car. She would not touch her breakfast until it appeared. When it did, she climbed down and took up her post by the door, with a fresh stack of drawings, pressed to her chest like something that might spill, and she would surrender them to no one, not Donata, not Basile, not her own father, until Marin was through the door and kneeling on the floor to receive them into her 2 hands. Corrado began to find reasons to be there when it happened. He had a report to give her. He had a question about the week schedule that could easily have waited and did not. He wished to observe, he said, from the hall, at the permitted distance, and he stood at that exact distance every single day and watched a woman in a torn coat do the one thing all his money had failed to buy. It plainly cost him something to stand there not understanding it. He came back anyway, every day, and stood and watched. "You never make her do anything," he said one afternoon, while Vida was gone to wash the pencil gray from her hands. "No," Marin said. "You wait for a child to decide. You waited days for her to hand you a piece of paper?" 4 days, Marin said. "And she handed it to me because I waited. If I had reached in and taken it, she would have learned that her things are not truly hers, that a bigger hand can help itself whenever it likes. She has already learned that lesson once, in the worst possible way. I will not be the one to teach it to her twice." He was quiet a while. "My people do not speak to me the way you speak to me," he said. "Your people want things from you," Marin said. "Money, protection, permission to keep breathing in your city. I only want your daughter to be all right. It makes me braver than is probably good for me, and bravery is the only thing that man never managed to arrange out of me, though he tried." He looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable, as if filing that away with the rest of what he had read. The coffee tin lived in her bag now, because she did not trust the apartment she was in, the middle of leaving. He glimpsed the lid of it once when she opened the bag for a pencil, the faded marker, the name of the small clinic that had been hers before Leland had convinced her, gently, patiently, across 2 unhurried years, that she was not steady enough to be trusted with it. Corrado read the name the way he read everything, once and completely, and he said nothing, and she was grateful, and she did not yet know what a man like him would try to do with the thing he had read. He tried to send a car for her. She refused it. He tried, in writing, to double the sum they had agreed, and she crossed his number out and wrote the first one back in its place and returned the page to him, folded. He offered her a room in the house, so the long drive would not wear her down. She said no, before he had finished the sentence, and the speed of the no made him look at her more closely than she wished to be looked at. "You are afraid I am buying you?" he said. "I left a man who arranged my whole life, because arranging it was easier than asking me about it," she said. "He never raised his voice. Not once. He simply tidied me away, choice by choice, until there was no room left in my own life for me to stand in. I am not for sale. I am also not a thing to be saved. Work with me on those terms, or lose the one person your daughter has chosen for herself in 11 months, because you could not bear to be told no in your own house." He did not send the car again. That night, alone, her phone lit with a message from a number she had made herself stop knowing by heart, and her stomach dropped before she had read a word. "I hear you are playing house for a criminal now," Leland had written. "That is a new low even for you. When it falls apart, and it will, do not call me." She sat with her thumb over the block button for a long minute, hating that the old voice could still reach in and turn her cold from across the city. And then she set the phone face down, without answering, which was its own small, hard-won victory, and she did not sleep much. Then, on a gray Thursday, the girl did a thing she had not done in 11 months. When Marin stood to leave, Vida slid down off her chair, crossed the whole length of the front hall entirely on her own, past her father, past Inada, and stopped at the door and pressed her small hand flat against the wood and looked back over her shoulder at Marin, and would not move. She wants to go with you, Corrado said, and his voice was not entirely steady. She has not walked out that door since the funeral. She will not even stand near it. Marin knelt by the child. Not today, she said gently. But I am going to tell you the exact hour I come back tomorrow. And I have never once been wrong about that. Not ever. Would knowing help? Vida looked at her with the grave, weighing attention of a person 3 times her age. Then she nodded, once, firmly, and let out a small breath that was almost, not quite, but almost a laugh. And it was the loudest thing anyone in that house had heard the child make in almost a year. Behind her, Corrado had gone very still again. But it was a different stillness now. The stillness of a man afraid that moving too fast might scare away something he had waited 11 months to see. Tomorrow, he said as though the word were fragile. Marin nodded. Tomorrow. And she found she was already counting the hours too. Marin wrote the terms herself, at the long table in Corrado's study, while he stood at the window and watched her do it, and did not correct a single line. She wrote that she would set the pace of the work and no one else would. She wrote that the child would never be pushed towards speech, that Marin could halt any session, any method, any visitor she judged harmful to the girl, and that she owed no one an explanation when she did. She wrote that she kept her own home, her own hours, and would be paid an ordinary wage for ordinary work, no more. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote the clause that made him set down his pen. You will knock before you enter her room, she read aloud into the quiet study, and you will wait until she looks at you, and you will not cross the threshold until she does. The same rule that binds me, binds you. She is small, and she is grieving, but her yes still has to be asked for every time. Sign that, and I stay. He looked at the sentence for a long moment. In my own house, he said half to himself, I am to ask a child of 6 for leave to enter a room I pay to keep warm. Yes, Marin said. That is precisely what you are to do. And when you learn to do it for her, you may find you have accidentally learned to do it for everyone, which will make you either a better man or a far less comfortable one, possibly both. He signed it. In the same spare exact hand she had seen on the folded pages he sent back. Then he read her name, where she had signed beneath his, Marin Sundal. The letters after, it gone now, given back, and he looked at the empty space where they used to be for a moment too long. They fit you, he said. Whoever told you they did not was lying to keep you close. He did not, he said, care for men who kept women close by making them smaller. Marin did not trust her voice, so she said nothing, and he let her keep the silence, which was its own kind of gift. Word of the arrangement traveled the way everything traveled in that house, and Ilaria Vosch arrived on a Sunday, in a coat the color of frost, to inspect the famous wrong number in person. She watched Marin kneel on the marble to gather the day's drawings into her hands, and she smiled the smile Marin was learning to set her feet against. How touching, Ilaria said. He collects strays now, our Corrado. A dead wife's empty chair, and now a woman who lost her little clinic and her nerve in the very same year and came looking for both. In a criminal's front hall, she let it settle. Men like him adore a project, you understand, right up until the moment it is finished. Tell me what you will be to him once the girl is mended and there is nothing broken left in you for him to fix. Marin gathered the pages without hurry and stood. When something living is frightened or in pain, she said, my hands do not shake at all. She looked Ilaria full in the face. It is only people like you who can still make them shake, and I am getting better every week at not letting you. The frost of Ilaria's smile cracked, and for once the elegant woman found nothing to set down coolly on the stone, and left earlier than she had plainly intended to. Because the work was slow and fragile, Marin brought in a colleague she trusted, a child psychologist named Soren Vidal, warm and easy and quick to laugh, who from the first minute treated her as the most qualified person in any room she stood in. He deferred to her. He asked her opinion twice and wrote both answers in his notebook. He made a dry joke about the reward chart in the old specialist's file, and Marin laughed aloud, a real laugh, standing in the front hall, and the sound of it turned Corrado around from clear across the room like a key turning in a lock. He was jealous, plainly and entirely, and he was clearly unused to being either of those things. He is good with her, Corrado said afterward, meaning Soren in the flat tone of a man reporting whether he means to have removed. He is good with children, Marin said. It is his profession. He put his hand on your sleeve. He was turning a drawing right side up. Marin studied him with open interest. You spent an entire afternoon in a room with a man you could, I am told, ruin before supper, and instead, you stood in the corner and counted how many times he made me smile. That is not the behavior of a man who feels nothing. I do not count, Corrado said, which was the least convincing sentence she had ever heard him produce, and she did not tell him so. She only noticed with some alarm that she had begun to measure her afternoons by how often she could unsettle the most governed man in the city, and that enjoying it was going to cost her. In the evenings, once Vita was asleep, he took to staying. He learned that Marin drank her coffee black and would not accept a single thing she had not first asked for. She learned that he read every letter twice, slept only a handful of hours, and could not sit with his back to a door. She learned that he had grown up with nothing and now owned nearly everything, and that the two facts had left him unable to believe a person might refuse a thing simply because it had not been asked for. He very nearly offered, one night, to buy the clinic back, the one whose name was inked on the lid of her tin, and she watched the offer take shape in his face and stopped it before it could reach his mouth. Do not, she said quietly. If I get it back, I get it back with my own hands. That is the entire point of it. And if you never do, he asked, then it stays mine to fail at, she said, which is a great deal more than I have been allowed in a long time. He looked at her across the low lamplight as though she were a language he had begun to learn far too late, and wished, badly, that he had started sooner. He did not reach for her. She was aware, sharply, of exactly how much he wanted to, and of exactly how carefully he did not, and she honestly could not have said which of those two things moved her further. She was nearly home that night when her phone rang, and it was Donata, and the old woman's voice was frightened in a way that steady, unshakable voice never was. Come back, Donata said. The child woke in a terror and cannot be calmed, and she has pressed herself against the door, and will let no one on this earth near her but you. Marin drove back through the dark with her heart in her throat and did not remember a single turn of the road. The sound of Vita's distress reached her from the bottom of the stairs. Vita was pressed into the corner of her room farthest from the door, both hands clamped over her ears, her whole small body shaking with a grief far too large for it, making a sound Marin had heard only a few times in her life and had hoped never to hear again. The sound of a person living through the worst thing that had ever happened to them, as though it were happening a second time, right now, in this room. Corrado stood in the middle of the floor, and the most powerful man in the city looked utterly, uselessly helpless. Vita, he said. Vita, you are safe. Look at me. You are safe now. The words that moved armies and emptied rooms moved nothing at all. Each command only seemed to press the child harder into the corner, as though his certainty were one more wall closing on her. Stop, Marin said low, and he turned. You are speaking to her the way you speak to men who are afraid of you. That works on men who are afraid of you. It will do nothing here. Get down onto the floor. Do not touch her. Do not tell her she is safe, because she does not believe you, and it teaches her that you are not listening. Let her decide for herself whether she is safe. That is the only version she will believe. She watched the old refusal move through the whole length of him, the entire architecture of a man who had stayed alive by never once lowering himself in his own house, by never letting anyone see him kneel. Then he knelt. He went down onto the floor of his daughter's room in his fine dark clothes, and he laid his hands flat and open on the boards, where the child could see they held nothing, and he waited. And Marin saw exactly what it cost him to do it, and loved him a little for paying the price without complaint. She lowered herself to the child's other side, near but not touching. And she did not say a word. She let the terror run. She had learned a long time ago that you cannot argue a person out of the middle of the worst night of their life. You can only come and sit at the edge of it quietly, so that they are not alone in the center of the dark. She hummed, nothing. She promised nothing. She simply stayed, and let the storm in the small body spend itself. And slowly, slowly, the crying folded down into sobbing, and the sobbing thinned into ragged, hiccuping breath, and after a long while a small hand came away from a small ear and reached out, blindly, searching. "There," Marin murmured. "There now. You called, and I came. I will always come when you call. That is the whole reason a person has a voice." The child fell asleep between them on the floor, with one fist knotted in Marin's sleeve, and one bare foot tucked against her father's knee, and neither adult dared to move, for fear of waking her. So they stayed where they were, the three of them, on the hard, cold floor, in the gray hour before dawn. And it was there, in that gray hour, in a whisper pitched so low the child would not stir, that Corrado told her the thing he had told no living person. "She is not mine by blood," he said. "She is my brother's girl. He and his wife died in the same year the world decided. My name was a thing to be afraid of, and I took Vida, because there was no one else left to take her, and I told myself I would keep her safe. Because keeping people safe was the only shape of love I had ever been taught." He looked down at the sleeping child. "Then the woman I married, so that the girl would have a mother again, drove out to the house by the water in a storm I had told her not to drive through. Vida found her. She was the one who tried to wake her, who called and called and called into an empty house until her voice gave out, and by the time anyone came, it was long past helping." He was quiet a moment. "That was the day I learned that keeping people safe is a thing a man promises and not a thing he can do, and I have spent every day since trying to make that child forget it. You are the first person who ever told me the forgetting was the wrong thing to want." Marin let the silence hold for a while. "Who does this for you?" she asked at last. "When the worst night comes back for you in the dark, who comes and sits at the edge of it so that you are not alone in the middle?" "No one," he said, without any drama at all, in the plain voice of a man stating a fact he had stopped resenting long ago. "No one ever has. I made certain of it. A man with no one at the edge of his dark is a man no one can use against him." "I know the arithmetic," she said. "I married a gentler version of it. He never once raised his hand or his voice. He simply stood behind me while I cooked and waited for me to spill something, and then told me kindly that he had known I would. In time, my hands began to shake before I had touched the pan. I left because I could not remember which of the two voices in my head telling me I ruined everything was his and which had become mine." "Then they were all watching the wrong door," she said, and she did not understand until his hand came to rest over hers on the child sleeping back and stayed there. How badly she had been wanting someone to watch the right one for her. Outside, the black sky began, very slowly, to go gray, and neither of them moved. And for the length of that slow dawn, the three of them simply stayed, and for once the quiet in the room held no fear in it at all. The city expected Corrado Neri to marry Ilaria Vosch, and the city had built an entire evening around the expectation. The dinner was held in the great hall above the lake, under chandeliers the size of small cars, and every powerful house for 100 miles sent someone to watch two fortunes become one family. Marin was there for one reason only, because Vita would not settle for sleep unless she knew that Marin was somewhere in the building. And so she stood at the far edge of the marble in the single good dress she owned, feeling each pair of eyes that found her, weighed her worn shoes against the room, and slid politely away. Willaria moved through the crowd in silver like a woman arriving to collect on a long-standing debt, and every so often her glance found Marin and brightened, the way a cat brightens at a moving thing. They had brought Vita down to be seen. A grieving child who had begun to mend was useful to the story the evening meant to tell. The story of a hard man made gentle at last, ready to settle, safe now to do business with. Marin watched from across the hall as a photographer angled the girl toward the good light. She watched a woman she had never met reach out, without a word of asking, to smooth the child's hair for the picture. And she watched Vita go rigid and bloodless, and begin to fold inward, right there on the marble, in front of 200 of the most dangerous people in the country, her small hands starting to rise toward her ears. Something in Marin simply, cleanly, stopped being afraid. She crossed the open marble floor in front of the entire assembled city, and a passing tray of glasses clipped her elbow as she went, and the crash of it rang off the high ceiling and turned every single head in the hall, and she did not so much as break her stride. She went down into the wreckage of crystal on her knees and put her own body squarely between the child and the cameras and the reaching, uninvited hands, and she said, into a silence that had gone total and absolute, "This child is not a centerpiece for your evening. She loses her mother again every time a stranger touches her without asking first. You will not do it to help sell a wedding." Ilaria's laugh came light and silver and cruel across the room. She really cannot be taken anywhere, this one, can she? Do look at the mess she has made. Marin rose to her feet in the broken glass. She looked down at the ruin around her shoes, and then up at the beautiful woman in silver, and she did not reach for a single word of apology, not one, though the reflex to apologize had been trained into her for 2 long years and stood ready at the front of her mouth. "I break glasses," she said evenly, so the whole hall could hear it. "I have broken them my entire life, in rooms exactly like this one, full of people waiting to watch me do it so they can feel steadier by comparison. But I have never once broken a child to make a room more comfortable, and every person in this hall who watched this go on tonight and said nothing has just done precisely that." She turned slowly to take in the crowd. "You are all welcome to keep watching my hands and counting the things I drop. I will keep watching hers. I know which of the two of us is doing the more important work." Then, in front of 200 watching faces, Corrado Neri crossed to his daughter, and he did not scoop her up the way a man simply takes what is his. He crouched down to her level in his fine dark suit, on the marble, and he waited until her frightened eyes found his, and only then did he hold out one open hand and let her decide whether to take it. She took it. The most feared man in the country let a 6-year-old grant him permission in front of every house that had come to fear him, and something in the room shifted that no alliance could ever have bought. No one laughed. No one at all. And when Ilaria turned to Corrado with the flat expectation of a woman who assumes the intruder will now be removed, he looked at her for a long, deliberate moment, and then, his daughter's hand still folded in his, he stepped back and to the side, and left the whole silent, staring hall entirely to Marin. And every powerful person in the room understood in the same breath that the marriage the evening had been built and catered and photographed to announce was simply not going to happen. He found her afterward in the dim corridor outside the hall, where the music came muffled through the wall like something half-remembered. "You gave the room to me," she said. "You had already taken it," he said. "I only stopped standing in front of your light. The alliance is finished now. You broke it in front of everyone. Your world will send you the bill for that, and it will be a large one." "Then let them send it," he said, and there was no fear in it at all, only a kind of ease she had never heard in him. "I have spent my whole life buying alliances to make myself harder to reach. Tonight I watched a woman in a worn coat make herself the most dangerous person in that hall by refusing to let a child be handled, and I understood that I have been collecting the wrong kind of protection. The Vosh family cannot give me anything I want. You already have. Marin looked at him for a while, at the stillness that had stopped being cold somewhere along the way, at the careful hands he held deliberately at his sides, because she had once told him a child's yes has to be asked for, and he had quietly decided the rule was hers as well. She closed the last of the distance between them herself. You can put your hands wherever you like, she said. I am the one asking now. And she kissed him, there in the dark hallway, with the remembered music leaking through the wall, and he held her the way a man holds the one thing he has finally decided he will not break. And for once, in both their lives, neither of them was managing a single thing. The photograph arrived 4 days later, pushed under the door of Corrado's study before the sun was up. It showed Marin and Vida together on the front steps of the estate, the child's small hand folded trustingly into hers, taken from somewhere beyond the outer wall by a person who had stood close enough, that morning, to reach them if he had chosen to. On the back, in flat block capitals, someone had written a single line. Nothing behind his wall is as safe as he believes. Corrado read it once, and set it down very gently, which was more frightening than if he had crushed it. By that afternoon, he had pulled the thing apart into its pieces. The scorned Vosh house, humiliated in front of the whole city, and hungry now to see him humbled in return and threaded all the way through it. The loose, resentful, drunken talk of a man named Leland Price, who had been telling anyone in any bar who would listen that his ex was playing house with a criminal these days and would get exactly what such a woman deserved. He did not tell Marin any of this before he acted on it. That, in the end, was the whole of the mistake, and he would spend a long and lonely time coming to understand it fully. When she arrived the next morning, she found her worn canvas bag already packed and carried up without her, her coat moved to a wardrobe in a guarded inner wing of the main house, her tin with the clinic's faded name set carefully on an unfamiliar shelf beside a glass vase worth more than everything she had ever owned put together. As though someone had tried, with real tenderness and no permission whatsoever, to rebuild her small life inside a cage and expected her to be grateful for the quality of the bars. "What is this?" she said very quietly. "You will stay here where I can keep you until this is handled," he said. He showed her the photograph then, and the writing on the back of it, and fear went through her first, cold and total and reasonable. And then, hard on the heels of the fear, came an older thing, one she recognized the way you recognize a smell from childhood. "You moved my whole life without asking me a single question," she said. "You read a threat, and you decided my answer to it before I had even been allowed to hear the question. You did, to me, the precise thing you signed your name swearing you would never again do to your own daughter. Knock. Wait. Do not cross the threshold until she looks at you. I made you write that clause out twice so that it would stay in you. And the very first time it was truly tested, you forgot every word of it in a single afternoon." "This is different," he said, and she nearly laughed aloud, because it was the exact sentence, word for word, that every controlling man she had ever known had reached for. The sentence that made his fear the only fear that counted, and her refusal a small obstacle to be steered gently around. "It is not different," she said. "It is only frightened, which is not the same as right. Leland was frightened too, you know. He was frightened that I would leave him, so he arranged my life. Gently, patiently, without ever once raising his voice, until I could not leave. You are frightened that I will be hurt, so you arrange my life until I cannot be." And from the inside of the cage, Corrado, the reason does not matter even slightly. The reason is never the point. The cage is always exactly the same size. "She will stop speaking again without you," he said, and in the very instant the words left his mouth, she watched the understanding of what he had just done cross his face like a shadow crossing a floor. Maren felt it close around her heart, like a cold hand. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not you dare use her against me. That is the one thing in the world I cannot forgive, and you know it, because I told you. That is the exact thing I am leaving. You taught that little girl, with your own signature, that her love for someone would never be turned into a rope to tie her. Do not make me be the one standing here who proves to her that you lied." A small sound came from the doorway. Vida stood there in her nightgown, woken by the voices, looking from her father to Maren and back again, with the still weighing eyes that missed nothing, understanding more than a child that age should have to, that the tall one and the woman with the tin were breaking, and that she was the rope they were breaking over. Maren saw the child see it, and it was almost enough to make her stay. And that, she understood, was precisely the trap. A love used as a rope is still a rope, even when the hand that pulls it belongs to someone small. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, all the certainty had drained out of him and left only a man who had just frightened the one person he had let himself love, and who could not, for all his power, take a second of it back. "Where will you go?" he said, and his voice had gone rough. "That is not your decision," she said. "It never once was, that was always. From the very first day, the entire point of me. You do not get to keep me safe by making me yours to move. If a thing is only safe when it cannot choose, then it is not safe. It is owned. I spent 2 years being owned by a man who called it love, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life being owned by a better one who calls it protection." He reached for her once, and stopped himself because his own signature on a page in his own study had bound him not to cross a threshold uninvited, and he understood at last that the threshold was not only the child's door, it was every place a person had the right to say no. He let his hand fall. She took the tin down off the unfamiliar shelf, and she left every other thing exactly where he had placed it. All of it. The coat, and the books, and the vase-priced life. And she walked out of the guarded wing, and down the wide stairs, and past the tall front window where a small empty chair still stood angled toward a road. And walking past that chair was the hardest single thing she had ever done in her life, because leaving him meant leaving the child too, and she made herself do it anyway. Because a man who will build you a cage to keep you safe has still, at the end of the day, built you a cage. She rented a narrow room above a bakery on the far side of the lake, with a window that looked onto a brick wall and a lock that answered to no one on earth but her. She took work at a clinic that was not her own, filing charts and scrubbing floors, and, on the afternoons they allowed it, sitting quietly on the ground beside the children no one else on staff could reach. In the evenings, she dropped coins into the tin, one at a time, and studied, late, for the examinations that would give her back the letters she had signed away. The ones a patient man had talked her out of over 2 unhurried years. The ones a still man had told her fit her and had been stolen. She did every part of it, with her own 2 hands, deliberately, because she had promised herself that the entire point of the thing was that no one else would be permitted to do it for her. On a Tuesday, a boy of 8 was brought in, who had not spoken since a fire took his home, and the staff had labeled him combative, and Maren sat down on the ground a careful arm's length from him, and took out a pad of paper, and began without a word to draw a house. She did not look up. She waited, and she thought of a cleared hallway and a torn page, and a small hand that had gripped her coat, and her own hands, on the cold clinic floor, did not shake at all. She did not answer his message. There was only the one. It had come the morning after she left, and it did not ask her for anything at all. "I did to you the thing I swore on paper never to do to her," it read. "I heard you say the words while I was in the middle of doing it, and I did it anyway, because I have kept people alive my whole life by taking their choices from them, and I did not know another way to love a person." That was not protection. It was fear wearing protection's coat, and you saw straight through the coat, the way you see through everything. Your belongings have been returned to you, untouched, exactly as they were. The threat is gone, dealt with, handled quietly and without harm to anyone, because you told me once that turning every problem into violence only proves the fear is still the thing running me, and I found I could not stop hearing you say it. You are free, not watched, not kept. I will not contact you again unless you ask me to. She read it far more nights than she would ever have admitted to anyone, and she did not answer it, and she found she could not make herself delete it either. She noticed the shape of what he had not done, and understood. It was a kind of language. He had not sent flowers. She would have to return. He had not sent men to persuade her. He had not filled the tin, or bought the clinic, or solved a single thing that was hers to solve. For the first time, a powerful man was loving her by keeping his hands still, and she did not yet know what to do with a gift that took the form of an absence. Across the black water, a small chair sat at a tall window. Corrado did not photograph the child waiting in it, though a lesser and more frightened version of him would have, and would have sent the picture. He sent Marin no word at all about how little Vito was eating, or how the stack of drawings had gone still and thin, or how the girl had folded slowly back down into her silence, like a house shutting its rooms, one by one, for a long winter. He had used the child exactly once as a rope to hold the woman he loved, had felt precisely what it did to both of them, and he would not do it a second time now if refusing to cost him everything he had left, which he was beginning to understand it very well, might. Instead, he sat beside his daughter in the lamplit evenings and told her the plain truth, because the truth was the last thing he had left that Marin would have approved of him doing. I sent her away while trying to keep her, he said one night, to the child, who did not answer him. I did to her the same thing I did to you, and to your mother before her, and to every single person I have ever been afraid of losing. I make the doors too heavy to open, and then I cannot understand why the room's empty. He looked down at the dark, unmoving road below the glass. She would tell me the two of us deserve the choice. She would tell me in that voice that I do not get to keep the people I love by making certain they cannot leave. Vita leaned her head against his arm and said nothing at all, and went on watching the empty road. And after a while he stopped, hoping the car would come, and only sat with her while she hoped it. The word that finally broke almost a year of silence was not the one that anyone in that house had been waiting for. It came on an ordinary gray evening, 3 weeks to the day after Marin had walked out. Vita was in her chair at the tall window, watching a road that had held no gray car for 21 days, and Donato was moving along the hall lighting the lamps against the dusk, and Corrado sat at his desk with a document he had read the same line of 4 times and not taken in, when the child opened her mouth and, in a voice rusted, small and strange from disuse, said 4 words into the quiet of the house. She said she would come. Every object in the room seemed to stop. Corrado was on his knees in front of the little chair before he knew he had risen from the desk, and even then, even in that, he made himself wait, made himself hold still until the child's eyes had come down from the window to meet his own before he let himself speak, because the rule was hers and he would sooner die than break it a second time. What you said, he whispered. Say it again, please. Marin, Vita said, and it was the first time in 11 long months the child had spoken a name aloud. And the name she had chosen to break her silence with was not her mother's, and it was not her father's. She promised. She said, she is never once wrong about when she is coming back. The little girl looked at him steadily, with the grave, patient eyes of someone far older than 6. You made her wrong, she said. You did it. And then, because 11 months of unspoken things do not come out all at once or in order, she added, in the same small rusted voice, I want her to come, and I cannot make her. You take everyone. You could not make her stay. He knelt there under the weight of it, corrected by a child, and did not defend himself, because there was nothing in the accusation that was not true. He did not send a car. He did not send men down the lake road ahead of him. He did not take his daughter's first 4 words in 11 months and turn them into a summons, though every instinct he had ever built, or been given, roared at him to do exactly that. To use the miracle as leverage the way he had used everything else in his life as leverage. He drove himself alone across the lake in the falling dark, and he climbed the narrow wooden stairs above a shuttered bakery, and he stood outside a thin door that was not his, in the rain, and he did the single hardest thing that his whole long life had trained him against doing. He knocked, and then he made himself wait. Marin opened the door and found the most feared man in the city standing on her threshold in the rain, not crossing it, not leaning into it, his empty hands loose at his sides, water running off him unregarded, waiting to be looked at before he presumed to come even 1 inch further. Behind her, the rented room was small and cold and plain, and entirely, unmistakably her own. Vida spoke, he said, before anything else at all, before his own name for what he wanted, because it belonged to the child first, and he would give it to her first. 21 days of nothing, and then tonight, out of nowhere, she spoke. He had to stop and steady his voice against something. Her first words in almost a year were about a promise. Marin, she said that you are never wrong about when you come back, and that I am the one who made you wrong. He looked at her, rain on his face. She is right about that. I made you wrong. I have never in my life wanted so badly to be corrected. Marin's eyes filled and stung. Why are you standing out in the rain, she said, when you could simply come in? Because the one time I did not ask before I came in, he said. I watched it break everything I care about, and I would rather stand in this rain until it drowns me than do that to you twice. So I am asking, that is all I came to do. Not into your life, not into your choices or your work or your money or your no. Only through this one door and only if it is a thing that you want. You told me, that first night, she said slowly, that you would make me forget. Those were the words. Come over, and I will make you forget. I was wrong about that too, he said. And it was the very thing she had been waiting to hear without ever knowing that she was waiting for it. You do not help a hurting person by making them forget the thing they cannot afford to lose. You taught that to a 6-year-old with a box of pencils and a torn coat, and I was too proud and too frightened to learn it from you, until you were already gone and the house had gone silent again. I do not want to make you forget anything, Marin. Not him, not the clinic they talked you out of, not even the worst of me, the man who packed your bag without asking. I want you to choose what you keep. That is the opposite of what I offered you at the start, and it took me losing you to understand that the opposite was the whole of the thing. So I am asking, from out here in the rain, with nothing in my hands, whether there is any chance at all that you might choose to keep me. She looked at him for a long moment, the still man made humble, the thin door standing open between them, the choice finally and completely and without any trick in it, entirely her own to make. Then she stepped back, and she opened the door the rest of the way. You can come in, she said. And he crossed the threshold only then, only when she had said the words, and not 1 second before them. And when at last he took her face in his 2 hands, he did it slowly, asking the question again with every small movement of them, and she answered it by fisting her hands in his wet coat and pulling him the rest of the way in. I love you, he said, into her hair, unsteady. I loved the way she chose you, before I had the first idea why. I loved that you handed a frightened child her own voice back, and then would not let me buy it from you. I loved that you returned every single thing I sent, and stood in the middle of my own hall in front of my own city, and told me no. He drew back to look at her face. I even loved you on the night you left me, because your leaving was the truest thing anyone has ever had the courage to teach me. I love you too, Marin said, the tears going down now and unregretted. But hear me. I am not coming back to a cage, however warm you keep it, however much you love me while you lock it. There is no cage, he said. There is a door, and you are holding the only key that has ever fit it, and I will stand on the outside of it and knock every single day of my life, for as long as you will let me, and I will wait, every time, until you look up and decide to let me in. And if I never look up, she said, testing it, because she had to, then I will grow old on your step, he said simply, and counted a better life than the one I had before you texted the wrong number. I am not asking you to make either of us easy. I stopped wanting easy the day my daughter chose you. I am asking you to choose, out loud, every day, and to know that whatever you choose, no one will ever again decide it for you. Least of all me. Then knock, she said, against his mouth. And he did. For the rest of his life, he did. You are soaked through, she said, when he was inside and the door was shut behind him. Sit by the wall. I will not have you catch cold on my one good chair. He sat where she told him, on the floor of the small room, this man who owned half a city, and let her put a dry towel around his shoulders, and did not once try to take charge of any of it. And she understood, watching him let himself be cared for, that the change in him was real and not a costume he had worn across the lake to win her back. They drove back across the lake together in the last of the rain, and did not speak much, because some things do not need managing. The house was still awake when they reached it. Vita was at the tall window, exactly where she had kept her vigil for 21 nights, and when the gray car came at last up the dark road her whole small body went still, and then she was down off the chair and across the hall, and at the door before anyone could open it for her. Marin knelt on the cold floor. The child looked at her, and looked, and drew a breath that shook, and said the name a second time. To her face this time, not as a promise recalled, but as a fact, arriving. Marin? And Marin gathered the girl in and held on, and over the top of the small dark head, she looked at Corrado, who was crying without any shame at all in the doorway of his own house, finally on the right side of a threshold, waiting, as he had promised, to be let the rest of the way in. 6 months later, Marin Sundahl reopened the small clinic whose name had lived all that time on the lid of a battered coffee tin, and she did it, start to finish, with her own 2 hands. She re-earned the letters after her name, at a scarred, rented desk, one late examination at a time, until the certificate came in an ordinary envelope, and she sat and looked at it for a long while before she framed it. She filled the tin coin by patient coin until it was heavy enough to rattle, and then she signed the lease herself in her own name, with a small and stubbornly ordinary loan. She had made Corrado write so many exit clauses into that he complained, wounded, that it insulted the entire honorable institution of lending. He did not buy it back for her. He could have bought the whole street it stood on without noticing the money leave, and he did not, because she had told him not to, and because he had finally learned, all the way down, that loving her meant letting a thing be hers even on the days his money could have made it effortless. Since effortless had never once been the thing she was asking him for. The clinic took in the children that other brighter places had quietly given up on, the ones who had stopped speaking. The ones the world had labeled difficult because difficult is so much simpler to write on a form than grieving. Her first family paid in full. She second could not pay at all, and she took them anyway, and the baker downstairs, whose own grandson had found his words again in her 2 rooms, sent up bread every morning until she made him stop, and then sent it up anyway. She kept the tin on the windowsill, now emptied of its saving and filled instead with pencils, sharpened, for whichever child arrived next, with a whole silent world to draw before they were ready to say it out loud. Vita came on the good afternoons, and sat on the floor with the frightened new ones, and showed them, without needing a single word to do it, that a silent child is not a broken child, only a careful one, waiting until she has decided for herself that the room is finally safe enough to try. She spoke more with every week that passed, always in her own time, never once on a schedule, never for a chart. The words came back, the way a tide comes back, without announcement, a name here, a question there, and then whole sentences arriving on ordinary afternoons, as though they had never been away. She asked for things now. she argued about bedtime. She told Corrado, once, at supper, that he was holding his fork like a man who had never been taught, which was true, and which made him set it down and laugh in a way that turned Donata around in the doorway, with tears standing in her eyes. A house that had learned to hold its breath was slowly, room by room, learning to let it out again. One afternoon Maren came back to her desk and found a drawing left on it. It was the old picture. The same one that had stopped her heart in a cleared and silent hallway what felt like a whole lifetime ago. The large figure lying flat and still on the ground and the small figure beside it, with its mouth a scribbled-out black hole, calling into a world with no one in it. But the child had drawn the whole thing again, freshly, right on top of the memory of it, and this time the small figure's mouth was open and clean and unscribbled, calling out loud and unashamed. And this time the road was not empty. This time, there were people on the road, coming. A tall one in a dark coat, a woman with a coffee tin under her arm. And this time, the small figure was not alone in the dirt at all. This time, someone had sat down close beside it, and stayed. Soren Vidal referred her his hardest cases now, and told anyone who asked that the best child therapist in the region ran a 2-room clinic above a bakery and could not be poached for any salary. And Corrado had long since stopped being jealous of the man, mostly because Corrado had learned that jealousy was only fear with better manners. And he was done letting fear run him. Ilaria Vosh married a shipping fortune in the spring and did not send word. And when their paths crossed once at a charity evening, she looked for a long moment at Maren, and at the child who now spoke, and at the still man who now waited to be let through doors, and she found, at the last, that she had nothing whatsoever left to set coolly down on the stone, and she moved along. On the first genuinely cold night of the autumn, Corrado stood on the porch of the small lake cottage that was hers now, her name on the lease, with his coat already on and buttoned, and looked at Maren and looked past her at the child asleep by the fire with a box of pencils fallen open and scattered bright across the rug. "Should I go?" he asked, not because any part of him wanted to, because he had learned, at a cost he would never fully finish paying, that the asking was the whole of the thing, that a stay is only worth anything at all in a house where a leaving would have been allowed. Months before, the question would have frightened her, because every answer she had ever handed a man had come with a bill attached to it. It did not frighten her now. She crossed the small warm room, and she reached up and took the heavy coat from his shoulders, and she hung it on the hook beside her own, where it had come to belong. "Stay," she said, and he stayed. The man who had once promised a stranger over a wrong number that he could make her forget, spent the rest of his life doing the exact and patient opposite, learning her, keeping only what she chose to keep, waiting at every door in every weather until she looked up from what she was doing and decided freely to let him in. And the child who had gone silent because her voice had failed to save the one person she loved most in the world, learned, slowly, over years, in a room full of pencils, that a voice was made for something far better than saving. It was made for calling out to the people you love, across any dark and any distance, and being answered, and being answered. If a story ever reminded you that the people worth keeping are the ones who knock and wait to be let in, and never the ones who let themselves in, do me a kindness and tell me in the comments who first taught you the difference, and then stay a while and look around. There is always one more door here, worth opening.